Today it's more prevalent. We all know about classic cars and the marketplace. But really, there was a point in time in history where we really didn't care about previous generation cars. Nobody kept their old cars. Who wants to go to a show and look at them? Who really cares about them? They were here, they were done, they were over with. So what really happened? And when did it happen? When did we start realizing that we need to keep the past alive to showcase it to future generations? Well, a point in time made us realize that our past products were worth keeping. And a generation of the most youthful people ever in history opened the eyes of the entire world to classic automobile. And for that, we're ever grateful that this happened. Because without it, our old car would literally just be our old car. So today, AutoLooks is going to take a look at our classic marketplace. Welcome back to the AutoLooks podcast. I'm your host, as always, the doctor to the automotive industry, Mr. Everett J, coming to you from our host website at AutoLooks.net. If you haven't been there, stop by, check it out, read some of the reviews, check out some of the ratings, go to the Corporate Links website page, big or small, we have them all. Car companies from around the globe, all available in one direct location. That is the AutoLooks.net website. The AutoLooks podcast is brought to you by Ecom Entertainment Group and distributed by Podbeam.com. If you'd like to get in touch with us, send us an email over at email@AutoLooks.net. So like I said in the beginning, the classic marketplace, it never really existed for the longest time. I remember as a kid going out into the mid-'80s and not being a lot of classic car shows. And even still, you go to a classic car show and a lot of the vehicles really weren't that classic. It's the mid-'80s and I'm looking at cars from the 70s or even just the mid-'60s. Things from the 50s, not a lot of people had them. So what happened? And how did we get here? Well, really, the classic marketplace and classic car shows didn't really start taking off until the 70s, when the baby boom generation started having families. They started realizing some of those cool cars that their parents had given them from the past, rolling around in a Chevy Bel Air convertible from the 50s. And then they have kids in the late 50s, and they put that car in the garage, they forget about it. Here they are in the 70s, and their kids are getting into high school, and they want to work on cars. And they want to know about past vehicles and some of the great stuff that we had. They've only seen pictures and movies. They start asking questions, and you're like, wait a minute, I got an old car out in the garage. Let's go take a look at it. And then it starts to become a project for you and your kids. You want to rebuild that old car and drive it around because the old car is cool. It was simple. It was plain. It had some features that you don't even have today. Cars, by the time you're getting into the 70s and into the 80s, yeah, they had all kinds of different features and other things. But like a vacuum ashtray in a 55 Bel Air? A little bit more different. And hey, those cars were built out of steel with tons and tons of chrome. It just blew your mind. Here you are driving this two-box design with integrated lights and bumpers, barely any chrome, and essentially just a radio, a giant bench. It was made for a market that just needed cars, not a market they wanted to showcase to you. In the 70s, we started realizing vehicles from as early on as the 30s were built to showcase what we loved. The Chrysler Airflow, utilizing aerodynamics and showcasing to us that golden era of steam power for modern trains. We looked at it in the 50s and it was just an old car. But in the 70s and 80s, we started realizing that was a piece of art. Those cars meant more to us than we really thought. And we're getting into the days of the late 60s and into the 70s and into the 80s. Everything's getting bland, boring, gelatinous blobs. There's no presence. There's no characteristics. There's no soul in any of the vehicles that we have. We're losing that. We're losing that grunt of V8 power because of the oil embargo. We're losing that sleek designs that went with a time period where everything was designed to perfection. We were just building because we had to now. So people started asking those questions. Why don't we try and relive some of those past important vehicles and show the world of today what we had in the past? Automobiles really, even into the 70s and into the 80s, were not collector items. But with movies and TV shows starting to have more and more of these amazing vehicles in them, like Christine, Back to the Future, the A-Team, Magnum PI, and later on, Fast and the Furious, people started wanting those vehicles that those people had. Sure, we were able to get them before. How many people out there were able to go out and get yourself a 76 Ford Gran Torino in the exact same color coordination that you could be seen on Starsky and Hutch. Anybody can go out and buy those. It wasn't a special edition. You got to remember, during the 70s and even into the 80s, special editions still weren't becoming big and profitable items. People just bought cars to drive them. They didn't buy them because it was a Nissan Rogue with special edition Nissan Rogue emblems, stitching, and color scheme, wasn't it? These classics were not seen as collector items. But as a lot of these cars started dying out in history because we only saw them as an automobile that we drove from point A to point B, we started getting into a generation that sold off all of their fun, amazing cars, grew up during the muscle car and pony car era. They had these big, powerful vehicles, whether it be a Chevelle wagon, an El Camino SS, or even a Pontiac GTO. They had vehicles with power in it. And now they're driving a button-down, 6-cylinder minivan, hauling a whole bunch of kids all over the place. No. But when those kids got older, like we said, in the 70s, and they started pulling these cars out and started repairing them, they thought they were cool. They thought they were great. Dad can give you the Vista Cruiser. Who wants that? It's got power. It's got, some decentness to it, but it's a big station wagon. Nobody wants to drive that. I want to drive my dad's 55 Corvette. That's what I want to drive. I want to drive that classic car that they were never able to get. They rejuvenated the past. But because there were so limited amounts of them, it created more of desirability. People wanted them. DeLorean was a car company that came and went so quickly. And at the end of their time, they had such legal litigation against them that nobody wanted to associate owning a DeLorean whatsoever. That was until 1985 and a movie called Back to the Future came out. When Back to the Future came out, everyone wanted a DeLorean. Unfortunately, by this time, DeLorean Motor Company was out of business. There were no more cars to buy, except for the ones that were already out there. There was so many people wanting to create their own time machine from DeLoreans, the demand started increasing. Our classic car market, with people owning a piece of history, was growing. How many people during the 80s and 90s wanted the General Lee? They wanted to relive the 1970 Dodge Charger days. They didn't want to be associated with that real crappy Chrysler Omni platform Dodge Charger Turismo from the 1980s. No, they wanted an original classic Charger from the set. So these limited editions started driving up the resale market. Movies, television shows put more of these cars into the forefront of people. More eyes across more generations seeing these vehicles. Brand new markets started appearing. Active sports cars have been around since the 1970s. Sports sedans have been around since the 50s. Performance trucks from the 80s. And the import tuner scene. Most of the vehicles you saw in the Fast and Furious movies were 80s and 90s cars. For a movie from 2001, why are we associating anything with a 1995 Toyota Supra 6 years after the car is out and at a point in time when nobody cares about them? This movie brought back those cars. It made the Honda Civic Coupe a cool vehicle as more people saw that they can tune them. They can create them into the own way they wanted. It showcased some of these classic vehicles we all associated with boring people. When I was a kid, CRX was associated with a nerdy university kid. You only ever saw dorky kids driving those old CRXs. But by the time the Fast and Furious movie came out and the import scene blew up in the early 2000s, those crappy little two-box designs from the 1980s and early 90s became an amazingly cool product everyone wanted. Classics were cool. When I was in high school, owning something like a 1992 Dodge Stealth RT Twin Turbo in 1999, 7 years after the car came out and when the car was no longer in production, was cool. Owning a 90 Eagle Talon was cool. But back in the 80s, if you didn't have a brand new IROC Z and you're driving around one from the 70s, you weren't cool. You're just driving an old beater. See, back in the 70s and into the 80s, when we first started realizing about the classic marketplace, people still didn't see it. If you go back and watch even movies from that point in time, you'll see people picking up crappy old classic cars, beat up old wrecks that are like 20 years old in parking lots at sales dealerships for a couple $100. Today, that car commands thousands upon thousands of dollars. But back then, we didn't know their worth. We didn't know those classics could be worth anything because nobody wanted them. Nobody wanted to own them and nobody wanted to showcase that piece of history. Like I said, movies and TV shows helped bringing that out. Tucker, the movie, really brought everybody's attention to Tucker Motors. And with only 50 cars ever being out, up until the point in time before that movie came out, if you found one of those, you can get them dirt cheap. It's from a failed car company nobody cared about. After the movie came out and it showcased what they went through, the hardships they had, and how the big three brought them down, everybody wanted it. Everybody wanted to stick it to General Motors and Ford. They wanted to own that Tucker. So naturally, the resale value of those things skyrocketed. Today, trying to get a Tucker Torpedo, an original one, can be in 7 figures. Before the movie came out, you were lucky if you can get one, even selling one off for over 5 figures. Now they're in 7 figures. But one of the biggest things to ever make the classic marketplace expand exponentially was video games. Gran Turismo brought to light amazing products that North American marketplace did not have. We were never able to get a GTR Skyline, but when we saw it, we knew how much they were worth. And when we started realizing that that video game was as close to the original vehicles as possible, when owning a Mustang could be beaten by an old Datsun 510 with just some modifications, people started realizing that some of those crappy old classic cars from the past that everybody just threw away like garbage was more amazing than the car that we all thought was great. Video games showcased to us another side of the automobile we didn't understand. Classic car shows first started coming out in the 70s and 80s. When you show up in an old, 68 Toyota Corona, people laughed at you. You weren't allowed in. Beetles, being an imported vehicle, were allowed in, but not a Toyota Corona. That's an import, which is funny because I always love it when they say no imports and I see a Volkswagen Beetle sitting there. I'm like, that's from Germany. That's imported. Technically, living in Canada, just about all of our vehicles are imported. So how can you kick out my Corona? Today we don't, because that Toyota Corona is worth just as much as an old Chevelle. And there's even less of them in our marketplace, driving up the resale value. When I was in college, I came really close, and I'm kicking myself every single fucking day of my life for not calling person on it. For $400, somebody had an 86 Corolla GTS notchback for sale. $400, and it ran. And it was a stick shift. Today, finding something like that, you're lucky if you can get it under $10,000. You're really lucky even if you can find one for $5,000. But $400, it was right at the time that Initial D was coming out to the North American marketplace. Fast and the Furious had blown up, but no Corolla GTS was even part of it. Until the drifting world came to North America, these cars were considered old, grainy crappers. Nobody wanted them. Nobody thought they were cool until Initial D opened our eyes. A manga comic and TV show showed us drifting and brought it to the forefront. New types of racing, television series, movies, video games, they all bring these out. They all show us how much these things could be worth and how amazing these vehicles were from the past. We just saw them as boring, relentless vehicles that nobody wanted to own. It was your first car, and you would unload it super quick. Yeah, it was reliable. It was somewhat quick, but it wasn't cool. You got rid of that old Corolla GTS because you wanted that Mustang. And then you had kids, so you had to get rid of your Mustang. Later on in life, you'd go back to your Mustang until you realized that Corolla was more fun than owning that Mustang. Video games opened our eyes to all of these amazing attributes that some of these vehicles from the past had with them. And until those days, we didn't understand that. There were so many cars from the past. How many cars have I talked about in all these podcasts that you don't even think about, and you're like, oh my God, that's how rare that car was? Continental from Chrysler was its own brand at one point in time. Hell, even in the 80s when they created their own Continental. Bringing to light the exclusive amounts of the Frank Sinatra Continental Coupe that they had in the 1980s. It wasn't a Chrysler, it was his own brand. And having that original cassette, full library of Frank Sinatra tapes with it, made the car worth even more. And that's where our last one comes in for the classic marketplace. Scottsdale, Arizona televises an event every winter showcasing what they're getting for vehicles. And really, until the early 2000s, nobody even knew about this. They were doing it for decades beforehand. So the rich people were going out and selling and trading all these great cars. They were building their massive library of classic cars that they all love for cheap. Now you need to have 8 to 10 figures on hand to purchase enough vehicles to build a library because of companies like RM Auctions of Canada, yes, RM Auctions is Canadian, and Barrett Jackson, showcasing how much these cars are worth. Having a television show that shows you all of the interesting little features that a lot of these vehicles had and their rarity. Telling somebody that there's only 20 of these cars in existence. And you're like, wait a minute, I owned one of those in college. I sold it off for $200. You're not telling me that car is worth $250,000 now and I sold it off for $200? What the hell was I thinking? My dad had a 78 Civic hatchback, 5-speed. Ever see the movie Employee of the Month? Yeah, that little Honda Civic, okay? My dad had one. He sold it off, $200. Okay, he sold it off when I was 7 years old for $200. When I went away to college, early 2000s, decade later, that car would cost $5,000 to buy. Today, you're looking at over 10 to buy one of those cars because the classic marketplace has driven it so far up. And the fact that vehicles now from the fees are 70 years old makes them worth even more. Auction houses are making big bucks of ultra rare vehicles, and people are starting to see the automobile as an investment item, not just transportation. And that's something that we said really changed in the 70s and 80s. It became a fun factor. It became showing off. But then we found out how much money it's worth, and it became an investment. My crappy little car that's sitting in my garage right now is 24 years old this year. 1 year away from being considered a classic. When I go to car shows, people still don't consider it something that you would keep. But considering that it was a throwaway car from the early 2000s that nobody's going to care about, by the time my son can take that car off my hands in about 10 years, the car's going to be close to 35 years old. And how many Kia Rios will still be on the road? Sure, it's not going to make me rich, but at one point in time, that car will be worth more than it originally was. All cars are like that. Try and find an AMC Gremlin or Pacer now. They're not those cheap throwaway crap cars. We know they're bad. We know they're lemons, but people pay good money for an original version of it. And auction houses have turned the automobile into an investment. Owning a massive amount of vehicles that you manage to pick up for dirt cheap can make you good money. My Borrego, like I always stated, I should have never gotten rid of it. The second Kia releases a body-on-frame SUV or pickup truck for the North American marketplace, the value of that Borrego, the original vehicle that did that for Kia, will increase. If Kia ever gets quality under control to the likes of something, I'm not going to say Toyota or Honda, but maybe to the likes of like Nissan, then their want and desire will increase. The automobile, the classic marketplace, is here because a bunch of people saw their parents and grandparents' old cars and thought they were cool. They wanted to showcase them off, and we created car shows, cruise nights. Then we saw them on TV shows and movies. Then we saw them and used them in video games. And then an auction house told us how much these things are worth. Today, it's easy to find out what your classic car is worth and how rare it really is. My Borrego, I found out very easily. It was one of less than 1,500 ever sold in Canada. And with less than 15,000 ever sold in the States, there were under 17,000 Kia Borregos ever to hit North American shores. And I owned one of them. Now, if I went to Korea or other Asian marketplaces, there'd be thousands more. But here, it was a rare vehicle. It was a unicorn as well. It could be an investment vehicle, and I literally just threw it in the garbage. I love to use them as an example. My father-in-law has owned some vehicles from his past that I go back, and my mother-in-law tells me, it's like, oh, I remember we had one of those. And I'm like, yeah, do you remember what model? Oh, it was like the LTS version. I'm like, you know how much that thing's worth now? I don't know. I tell them it's like $25,000. I mean, I could have bought our Kia Soul with that. I'm like, you could have bought a Kia Soul with that. You paid $25,000 for a piece of shit these days, and guess what? Your old beat up piece of crap from the past is worth that much now. It's an investment. You can make money off of it. People are now doing that with other forms of automobiles. The classic marketplace has gone into many other things. Model kits, Playmobil cars, Hot Wheels. The classic automotive marketplace is there, and investments into them is behind us. The automobile isn't just a piece of machinery to go from point A to point B. It's an investment for ease of accessibility around the world. And with the right one, it could be an investment for future growth. It's not just an old car. It's a piece of history, and it's something amazing to look at. So do we need the classic marketplace? Yes. But do we need to blow it out of proportion that we've gotten to at this point in time in history? No. Toning it down a bit would be a bit better. But unfortunately, with more and more people getting out of car ownership, the classic marketplace is just going to get further and further out of reach for your average automotive owner. For myself, looking at buying a classic car these days essentially is something that I can't even think of until my kids are out of the house, because I can't afford anything along those lines. I can't go out and buy something for $1,500, spend $5,000 and get it back on the road. No, I have to go out and spend $15,000 on something and put $50,000 into it just to have something decent. It's getting out of control. We've opened up the eyes of everyone to a classic marketplace. We can't just shut the door on it right now. But maybe, just maybe, with technology taking over and autonomous technology moving us away from car ownership, maybe the classic marketplace will come back and grow once again. So if you like this podcast, please like, share, comment about it on any major social feeds or streaming sites. You've found the AutoLooks podcast on. Like us, share us, comment about us. Tell it to your friends, your family, your well-wishers, anyone else you could think of about the AutoLooks podcast. Click the little like button at the bottom and share us with your friends, your family, your well-wishers. After that, stop by the website, read some of the reviews, check out some of the ratings, go to the AutoLooks website page, big or small. We have them all, car companies from around the globe, all available in one direct location. That is the AutoLooks.net website. The AutoLooks podcast is brought to you by Ecom Entertainment Group and distributed by Podbean.com. If you'd like to get in touch with us, send us an email over at email@AutoLooks.net. So for myself, Everett J, the AutoLooks.net website, Ecom Entertainment Group, and Podbean.com. Strap yourself in for this one fun, wild ride that the classic marketplace is going to take us on.